The click of the playing cards was sharp in the quiet room. I sat at the small round table, my hands moving out of habit more than intention. The other women chatted about grandchildren, vacations, and new recipes. I nodded when expected, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. The Queen of Hearts slipped into my hand, and for a moment I stared at it too long. It reminded me of the red dress I wore the night I turned 21. The night I told him I needed space, not realizing I'd never see him again. 50 years later, I still wondered if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. "Your turn, Margaret," someone said, and I laid down the card without looking. The table erupted in polite laughter at a joke I didn't catch. I tried to smile, but my chest felt heavy. Every shuffle of the deck felt like the years slipping through my fingers. I thought of the letters I never sent. The apologies I never made. The phone calls I avoided because I told myself there would always be more time. Now time was all I had, and it was the cruelest gift. Across the table, Helen was bragging about her great-grandson winning a science fair. I wondered if my own grandchildren even knew my favorite color. I wondered if they knew I still remembered every birthday, even when no one remembered mine. The game moved on, and I played my cards, but my mind was in the kitchen of the little house I once called home. The smell of cinnamon rolls on Sunday mornings. The sound of laughter before it all went quiet. I had chosen work over family too many times. I had chosen pride over forgiveness. I told myself I was being strong, independent, unshakable. But I see now that I was just afraid. Afraid to admit I was wrong. Afraid to need someone. Afraid to open a door I had slammed shut. "Margaret, you're winning," someone said, and I realized I had taken the lead without noticing. It didn't feel like a win. I looked down at the pile of cards I had gathered, neat and perfect, and thought about how empty my house felt when I went home. The laughter in this room would end in an hour. Then it would be just me and the clock ticking too loudly. I had told myself that old age would be peaceful. But peace without connection is just loneliness in disguise. I remembered my sister's last Christmas before she passed. She had asked me to visit, and I told her I was too busy. I was never too busy, I was just too stubborn. Now the chance to make it right was gone forever. I played another card and forced a small smile when Helen congratulated me. But inside, the weight of decades pressed down like a winter storm. I thought of calling my son that night. We hadn't spoken in years, not really. We exchanged birthday cards with polite signatures, but the warmth was gone. It wasn't always that way. I remembered holding him as a baby, promising to protect him from everything. Somewhere along the way, I started protecting myself instead. And I lost him. I could feel my eyes sting, but I blinked quickly and focused on the table. No one here needed to see me fall apart over a game of cards. But as the next hand was dealt, I knew something had to change. I was tired of living in my own shadow. I was tired of pretending I had no regrets when they filled every corner of my mind. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe I still had a few hands left to play before the game was truly over. The rain had started by the time I left the card room. It was a soft drizzle, the kind that clung to your coat and hair like it wanted to follow you home. I pulled my scarf tighter around my neck and stepped into the quiet street. The smell of wet pavement mixed with the faint scent of lilacs from a garden down the block. I walked slowly, my shoes tapping against the sidewalk in a rhythm that matched my thoughts. Every step seemed to carry a memory with it. I thought of the birthday parties I had missed because of work. I thought of the phone ringing late at night and my choice to let it go to voicemail. I thought of the last time my son looked at me without a wall between us. A streetlight flickered overhead, and for a moment I stood still under its weak glow. The drizzle turned into a steady rain, and I didn't bother to open my umbrella. I wanted to feel something, even if it was just the cold water against my skin. My apartment building was only 3 blocks away, but I wished the walk were longer. I wasn't ready to be alone with my silence again. By the time I reached my door, my coat was damp and my hair clung to my forehead. I set my keys on the table, listening to the hollow echo of the empty apartment. The clock on the wall ticked louder here, each second sounding heavier than the last. I sat in my favorite chair, the one by the window, and stared at the phone on the side table. It was only a few inches away, but it felt like a mile. I picked it up, then put it back down. I told myself I'd call my son tomorrow. But I'd told myself that before. I closed my eyes and tried to picture his face. The last clear image I had was years old, from a summer barbecue when he was still smiling at me. I didn't know if he still smiled like that. The thought tightened something deep in my chest. I stood up abruptly and walked into the kitchen. I made tea, letting the steam rise into my face, but it didn't ease the knot in my throat. When I sat back down, the phone was still there, waiting. This time, I picked it up and held it to my ear without dialing. I whispered his number to myself, a number I had never forgotten. My hands shook as I finally pressed the first button. The dial tone was steady, almost reassuring, but I froze halfway through. What if he didn't answer? What if he did, and he didn't want to hear my voice? The fear was almost enough to stop me again. I set the phone down for the second time. The rain outside tapped against the glass, patient and steady, like it had all the time in the world. I didn't. I knew that. And yet I sat there, listening to the rain and the clock, wishing I could gather the courage to make one simple call. The rain had slowed to a faint whisper by the time I finally stood again. The phone sat on the table like a dare I'd been avoiding all night. It wasn't just an object anymore, it was a wall between me and the life I'd been too afraid to touch. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each beat a reminder that time was not infinite. I thought about all the years I had wasted convincing myself there would be another chance. Another birthday. Another Christmas. Another someday. But someday had a way of turning into never. I had seen it happen with my sister. I had seen it happen with friends I thought would live forever. One day they were here, and the next, all that was left was a box of their belongings and 100 things I wished I'd said. I didn't want my son to become another name on that list. The thought alone made my throat tighten. I reached for the phone and pulled my hand back again. Coward, I told myself. You've faced worse things in life. Why does this scare you more than anything else? Because this mattered. Because this was the one thing I couldn't buy, couldn't fake, couldn't replace. I took a deep breath and picked it up. The weight of it felt heavier than it should have. My hands shook as I began dialing. One number at a time. Slow. Careful. Like each button might break if I pressed too hard. When I finished, I held my breath and listened. The ring tone echoed in my ear, louder than it had any right to be. Once. Twice. 3 times. By the 4th ring, I almost hung up. Then I heard it. Hello? The voice was deeper than I remembered, but unmistakably his. I froze. For a moment, I couldn't speak at all. Then I forced the words out. It's me, I said quietly. A pause. So long I thought the line had gone dead. Then, Mom. Just that. One word. But it broke something open inside me. I wasn't sure you'd answer, I admitted. I wasn't sure you'd call, he replied. His tone wasn't harsh. It wasn't warm either. It was cautious. Like someone who had been hurt before and didn't want to be hurt again. I've made mistakes, I said. So many mistakes. I could hear him breathing on the other end. Slow. Measured. Like he was deciding whether or not to let me in. We both have, he finally said. That was all it took for the tears to come. They slid down my cheeks before I could stop them. I don't want to waste any more time, I told him. Neither do I, he said softly. It was strange, the conversation didn't suddenly fix everything. The years apart didn't vanish. But something shifted. The wall between us had a crack in it now. A small one, but enough for light to get through. We started talking about safe things first. The weather. His job. The garden I had been trying to keep alive on my balcony. He told me about a new coffee shop he liked. I told him about the neighbor's cat that kept sneaking into my apartment. We laughed once, quietly, like we were both afraid of scaring the moment away. Then, slowly, the harder truths began to slip in. I was angry for a long time, he admitted. I know, I said. I didn't know how to talk to you without it turning into a fight, he continued. I didn't know how to talk to you without running away, I replied. We both went quiet again. But this silence was different. It wasn't the cold, heavy silence of strangers. It was the silence of two people realizing they were still here. Still talking. Still trying. I kept your birthday cards, he said suddenly. I blinked. You did? Yeah, he said. They were short, but I knew you were still thinking of me. I bit my lip to stop another wave of tears. I was always thinking of you, I whispered. There was a long pause. Then, quietly, he said, I believe you. It was such a simple sentence, but it felt like forgiveness in disguise. We didn't dive into every wound. We didn't force apologies into places they weren't ready to fit. We just stayed on the phone. Minutes turned into hours. The rain outside had stopped completely, replaced by the occasional drip from the rooftop. I told him I still had his baseball glove in my closet. He laughed, a real laugh this time, and said he thought it was long gone. We talked about meeting soon. Not in some vague, one-day way, but with a real date. Next Saturday. He would come by for dinner. I promised to make the lasagna he used to love when he was a kid. By the time we hung up, it wasn't with a goodbye. It was with, see you soon. I set the phone down and leaned back in my chair. The quiet in the apartment didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full. Full of possibility. Full of something I thought I'd lost for good. I walked to the window and looked out at the street below. The wet pavement glistened under the streetlights. I thought of all the hands I had played in life. All the ones I had thrown away out of pride or fear. And now, finally, I had played the card I'd been holding for far too long. It wasn't a winning hand yet.